the father of this child was alive and saw this scene and knew that I was an F-14 pilot. You F-14 pilot, what were you doing? What the hell were you doing when the enemy came and hit the milk powder ships and my child was left hungry and without food? After a few minutes, one of them broke away from the group and started moving towards the merchant ships, the convoy that we had flown to cover them. If the enemy managed to sink those milk powder ships, I don't know what would happen in the country and what those babies wanted to do. The Iranian Air Force had F-4, F-5, and F-14 aircraft, which were the top-level aircraft of the Western Bloc. But over time, more attention was paid to the Iraqi Air Force. They started delivering French Super Frelon and Super Étendard. After that, the MiG-25, MiG-29, Mirage F1, EQ-4 and EQ-5 models, which were considered the top-level aircraft of the Eastern Bloc and Europe. And these aircraft had high capabilities in attacking ground targets, aerial reconnaissance mission, and intercepting enemy aircraft. With the support of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, the Iraqi Air Force was an up-to-date and advanced air force and was classified as one of the top 10 air forces. At the same time as these events, we were under sanction. In other words, we were able to manage the war only with the domestic manufacturing and self-sufficiency movement. At the same time that Iraq introduced the Super Étendard into the Persian Gulf, the Iranian Air Force also decided to transfer the F-14 aircraft to the Bushehr Air Base so that the Tomcats, along with the Phantoms, could carry out more effective operations against the enemy's naval attacks. I can confidently say that during the war, there was not a day when the Iraqi Air Force did not attack our oil facilities and tankers in the Persian Gulf, and we did not take off to confront them. The volume of flights at Bushehr Air Base was such that whenever we asked for leave, we were met with a no answer. The volume of flights was very high, and at the same time, the number of pilots was not enough. Besides, Iran is not only the Persian Gulf. We have refineries, we have air bases, we have oil facilities, we have factories, we have extensive facilities across the country that we should have covered. In addition to covering the skies of the Persian Gulf, we were also responsible for providing air cover for the rest of the country's skies. مسئولیت تامین فضای کشور توی بقیه نقاطی که اسپردم هم بر عهده نیروی هوایی به ویژه F-14. At the back seat of Major Jalil Zandi, we did a scramble flight. After we landed, comrades told me that my sister called from my city and were asking for you. Give them a call. I called and my sister told me that my mother is not in good health condition. My mother's illness has worsened and you should get there as soon as possible. I immediately went to Major Zarafat Far's office, who was the commander of our expedition group at Bushehr Air Base. And as usual, I was met with a negative answer. A few days passed like this. Coincidentally, a C-130 plane came to Bushehr to transfer a series of equipment from this base for the air defense base of Iraq. Major Zarafat Far said, "Come, it's your lucky day. The plane is going to Iraq. Take advantage of this opportunity and go to Iraq." I went to Iraq on this plane, and when I got off the C-130, I got to my mother's house. Before reaching my mother's house, I saw my sister who came towards me in a hurry and worried. I said, "What's up? What happened?" She said that the mother's condition has worsened. Let's go to the pharmacy to get her medicine. We were in such a hurry that I didn't go inside the house. We went to the Takht-e Jamshid 24-hour pharmacy. We delivered the prescription to the reception. The pharmacy was overcrowded. We sat until it was our turn. A large number of people came to the pharmacy to get milk powder. We gave the prescription to the pharmacist. I saw a mother with a baby in her arms, talking with pharmacist, with pleading and begging. We got a little curious. She raised her voice. She supplicated that you give my baby at least 1 can of milk powder. The pharmacist also said that we don't have milk powder, and he disagreed with what the lady said. There was really no milk powder. When the pharmacist reassured the lady that we don't have milk powder, at that moment, my eyes fell on the baby who had dried traces of tears on her face. The baby was thin and lethargic. My sister got up to console the lady, and we found out that this lady has recently lost the ability to breastfeed her child due to the loss of her husband in the war, and is forced to use milk powder to feed the baby. Unfortunately, due to the fact that the convoy of milk powder ships in the Persian Gulf was hit by Iraqi Air Force missiles, the country faced a milk powder and drugs crisis. When my eyes fell on this martyr's child, I realized what a terrible scene I faced, and I realized the depth of the tragedy. In that situation, I completely forgot about my mother's illness and prescription. You should have been there and seen. A child who recently lost her father in the war has no milk powder to eat. Can you imagine the critical situation? The father of this child went to war and was killed for me and people like me and for this country. If the father of this child was alive and saw this scene and knew that I was an F-14 pilot, he would not have said that I went to the front line and stood in front of the enemy. You F-14 pilot, what were you doing? What the hell were you doing when the enemy came and hit the milk powder ships and my child was left hungry and without food? All these ideas were constantly spinning in my mind and hitting my head like a sledgehammer. I was very sad. I had lowered my head, and I was constantly thinking about the reproaches of this child's father in my mind. I was in my mood when the voice of the pharmacist took me out of that mood. I took a look around, and it is like that the mother and child had been gone from that pharmacy for hours. In short, we took the medicines and went home. The next day, I talked to my mother's cardiologist. I fixed her condition and returned to Bushehr again. On the same day, I introduced myself to Major Zarafat Farr, who was the commander of our expedition group in Bushehr. Due to the stress we had in those days from the enemy's air attacks, for a while I forgot about my mother's illness, the baby and her mother, and the milk powder and that baby disappeared from my mind for a while. It was the 28th of April, 1987. Whenever we are on alert during the war, the deputy intelligence officer comes and explains the situation in the area to us. That night, the deputy intelligence officer came and explained the area to us and said that an oil tanker, 15 miles from Karg, had been hit by Iraqi Air Force missiles and would likely be attacked again. Usually when the ships were moving in convoy, we covered them completely. But when they were hit by the enemy's missiles and left the convoy or slowed down, they became a very easy target for the enemy. According to the briefing, we were told that at the same time from 12 noon today, a convoy from the Oman Sea, which included several milk powder ships, entered the area through the Strait of Hormuz. With the calculations and the briefing that were made, it was found that the convoy is 100 miles south of Bushehr, moving towards the north of the Persian Gulf. When I heard the word milk powder, suddenly all the events of a few days ago came to my mind. That baby, her martyred father, her desperate mother. Regardless of these issues, we were ready for any combat action. During the war, we usually had 2 sets of flight crews go to the base for the night alert. The F-14 flight crew includes a front seat pilot and a back seat pilot. Major Jalil Zandi and Second Lieutenant Nemat Karimi were the first 15 minutes flight crew that night. For the second 15-minute alert, Major Nizam Abadi and I, Second Lieutenant Jarrah. The flight crew of the first group had to wear G-suit and harness. Major Zandi and Lieutenant Karimi were the first group. At 1800, we received the alert duties from these comrades. As soon as Major Zandi and Lieutenant Karimi started to separate their equipment, and we started to connect the equipment to ourselves. After takeoff, we called radar station. It was twilight towards darkness. Radar officer led us to the east. We were surprised because the ship that was being targeted and was being towed to the dock was 15 miles from Karg, and accordingly, we should have been heading towards it. But instead, the radar officer directed us to the east, to the Farsi island. When we asked the reason for it, we found out that the radar officer was directing us towards the milk powder convoy that is moving from the Strait of Hormuz into the Persian Gulf. The radar officer gave us heading. When the radar officer announces a heading, it means that there is an enemy aircraft in that area. With the fighter's radar, I started to search, and in the same heading as the radar officer had announced, we discovered and identified 2 enemy planes. 2 Mirage aircraft were doing a 360-degree turn around the Farsi island. After a few minutes, one of them broke away from the group and started moving towards the merchant ships. The convoy that we had flown to cover them As soon as it broke away from the squadron and headed towards the milk powder convoy, it doubled its speed, lowered its altitude, and assumed an aggressive formation, clearly intending to attack the merchant ships. When you lock on to a target with the F-14 radar, this radar will accurately show you the heading, speed, and altitude. As a result, we were observing the enemy aircraft's position and movements accurately. At that time, foreign warships, especially American warships, were present in large numbers in the Persian Gulf. At this moment, an American warship started to warn us on the radio. They easily identified the type of our planes. They had our direction, speed, and all our flight specifications, and they said it on the radio. And at the end, they asked, "What is your intention for this flight?" I remember well that the American warship warned me on the radio that the F-14 aircraft took off from Bushehr Air Base. This is your heading. This is your altitude. What is your intention for this flight? What is your mission? According to the order. We should not have given them an answer, but he gave us a serious warning not to come within 20 nautical miles of us. Otherwise, we will fire missiles at you, because they didn't take any risks. And if an aircraft entered their 20 nautical mile radius, they would surely target it. As soon as he finished warning us, he also warned the Iraqi Mirage on the radio not to approach to warship. Come within 20 nautical miles, you will be shot down. I was so engrossed in intercepting the Mirage that I didn't realize how we had come within 20 nautical miles of the American warship. At this moment, suddenly the SN-1 and SN-3 lights, which were the warning light, turned on. These two missiles were armed American ships and had very high operational accuracy. Obviously, we had entered the radius of 20 nautical miles of the American warship, but probably because they saw that we were carrying out combat operations on the Iraqi Mirage aircraft. They did not carry out combat operations on us. We reached a distance of 10 nautical miles from the enemy aircraft. At the same time, the Iraqi Mirage began to gain altitude. It was dusk turning to darkness. Since we were flying to the west, the western horizon was somewhat clear, and since we were on the east side of the Iraqi Mirage, the Iraqi pilot could not see us. Let me mention one point. When two planes are approaching each other at a speed of about 900 kilometers per hour, they are actually closing in on each other at supersonic speeds. When I say 10 nautical miles, I haven't finished my sentence yet. 2 nautical miles have passed. Within seconds, I completed the combat checklist to intercept the Iraqi Mirage. I quickly coordinated with Major Nizamabadi. The best missile we could choose at that moment was the Sparrow. I chose the Sparrow missile. I completed the checklist before firing the Sparrow missile. At this moment, we were fully ready to engage and fire missile. As I said, at 10 nautical miles, the Iraqi Mirage began to gain altitude, and it was clear that he was ready to fire the Exocet missile. I could have shot the Iraqi Mirage at that moment because the radar and missile were fully prepared for firing, but I allowed the Iraqi Mirage to come closer to increase the accuracy of the missile. The Sparrow missile calculates to place itself in front of the target based on the calculations of the F-14 central computer. That is, instead of trying to go after the target, he predicts the path of the target and places himself in the front of the target path. At a distance of 7.6 nautical miles from from the Iraqi Mirage, I fired my first missile. The Sparrow missile was separated from the 8A station under the right wing of the F-14 aircraft. I followed the rocket fire with my eyes. For about 3 to 4 seconds, the rocket engine of the missile stays on. Unfortunately, about 5 to 6 seconds later, the missile dived towards the water. I couldn't believe that the missile would not do its duties properly in those critical moments. In order to fire the Sparrow missile in head-on situation, we must fire our missile at a distance of at least less than 3 nautical miles. The missile misses. I looked at the radar scope for a moment and saw that we were about -4.2. It means close to the limit of shooting permission. I fired the second Sparrow missile instantly. At that moment, all my hope was in that missile. After separating from under the wing pylon, the missile started to follow a straight path. I immediately assumed that I fired the missile out of parameter, and I was wrong. I was following the missile with my eyes. Everything that I am describing to you all happened within 3 to 4 seconds. Suddenly, the Sparrow started to soar and climbed hard. The missile hit the belly of the Mirage. We were so close to the point of impact of the missile on the Iraqi Mirage that we almost flew into the fireball from the explosion. We made 2 360-degree turn around the place where the missile hit the Iraqi Mirage and saw that the pieces of the Iraqi Mirage were falling into the water. The aircraft was at a low altitude, and some pieces of the Iraqi Mirage were still on fire, even though they were in the water. And clearly, the enemy pilot could not eject. Immediately, the radar officer's voice came on the radio that we were able to shot down the enemy plane. The radar officer, through the signals he was receiving, had immediately realized that we had succeeded in shooting down the enemy plane. At the same time, merchant ships had also seen this scene and had probably reported the downing of the enemy's Mirage to radar station. Of course, the moment I heard the radar officer's voice on the radio, I came to my senses and came out of that mood and emotions and realized that our mission was successful and positive. Of course, we had seen that the enemy plane had been shot down, but when the radar officer confirmed that the enemy plane had been shot down, we were more sure. The second Mirage, which was turning around the Farsi island, until the Mirage carrying the Exocet came back to give it fuel, as soon as it was informed of the downing of its comrade, it immediately left the area and returned to the Iraqi territory. Thank God, the mission of the Iraqi Mirages was completely cancelled. Let me also say that the downing of one of the comrades would have greatly reduced and weakened the morale of the other comrades of this pilot. When one of the enemy fighter planes was shot down, the rest of the pilots lost their fighting spirit to a great extent. They would not be found in the combat zone for a long time. After we shot down the Iraqi Mirage plane and were returning, I said to Major Nizamabadi, "You may not believe me. About a week ago in Iraq, I came across a martyr's child who was lethargic due to lack of milk powder. She was in a state of incapacity, and thank God we were able to bring this convoy, carrying milk powder, safely to its destination and make the country proud. This is a badge of honor for me, as the smallest soldier of the F-14 squadrons of the Iranian Air Force." After we got off the plane and while we were doing the post-flight checklist, I took a moment to look at the missile pylons and saw that 2 of the missiles were missing. I took pride in myself that we were able to make the Air Force, the nation, and the country proud. And for a moment, I said in my heart, I am proud of F-14. Like those who ride a horse and pat their horse's mane, I also hit the nose of the plane, and it was really a sweet and honorable mission. If the second missile hadn't hit the target, I said, it would have been twilight towards darkness. In that dark night situation, situation. We could no longer carry out combat action on the Iraqi Mirage, and most likely the Iraqi pilot would have fired his missile and destroyed the ships and escaped. At the same time that the Iraqi Air Force attacked our oil tankers, it did not neglect commercial ships carrying vital foods and drugs for Iran. The Iraqi Air Force had planned in advance to disrupt the import of food and drugs into Iran, and their attack that night showed precisely that the enemy was very determined to do this. The Iraqi pilot had clearly come to hit and sink the ships carrying milk powder. If the enemy managed to sink those milk powder ships, I don't know what would happen in the country and what those babies wanted to do. One fact is that the F-14 is a very scary plane. The captured Iraqi pilots told us. It was always mentioned in the fighter squadrons that you should try not to engage with the F-14 aircraft, but some Iraqi pilots entered our territory regardless of the existence of the F-14 aircraft. During our engagement that night, the Iraqi pilot didn't stop his mission until he saw the fire of the missile's rocket engine and continued his mission towards our merchant ships. The capability of Iraqi Air Force pilots was not low. In the 2 or 3 cases that I engaged them, it really proved to me that they continued their mission until the last moment when they see death in front of their eyes. We should not deny that these pilots were very capable, and some Iraqi pilots were indeed respectable enemies. But despite all these qualities and with all the advanced equipment they had, they could not win against us and reduce our oil exports to zero and disrupt the export and import process in the Persian Gulf. But we were able to defeat it, and we were able to take back all the land occupied by the enemy. After this incident, the first time I went on vacation, I went directly to the Takht-e Jamshid pharmacy and asked the pharmacist if you have any milk powder. He said, "How many do you want?" I was happy from the bottom of my heart and, thank God, saw that our mission was not fruitless.